Joining us now is the Imam and broadcaster Ajmal Masroor. Ajmal, always good to have you on, engage your views on these things. I mean, from a Muslim perspective, first of all, what do you make of Mr. Gove's announcement?
Well, first thing first, I don't have a problem with any definition anyone wants to come up with. As a Muslim, my faith is clearly defined as a religion of moderation. That's what God says in the Quran. And so therefore, anybody who follows any extreme interpretation isn't actually following Islam. So I'm quite happy that that doesn't apply to me. But it does apply to all of us, because it will curtail our freedom of speech. It will be misapplied that it has been done before. Whose speech and who's going to interpret it? The government's proposed banning, or at least calling some organizations as extremist, is already creating alarm amongst the wider civil liberty champions and organizations. So who's going to interpret it? How is it going to be applied? And to be honest with you, it sounds like a knee-jerk reaction to curtail our right to protest against Israeli occupation and Israel breaking international law. And that's very unfortunate, because we should be able to speak against any country that breaks international law.
Well, indeed. We do know, though, that there is a particular problem in some faiths. In your particular faith, clearly not anything you would believe yourself, or most Muslims for that matter. I totally get that. But we do have a disproportionate thing going on here in terms of numbers of people that have been arrested, numbers of people that are either in custody, numbers of people that have been convicted, number of offences that have taken place in the name of your faith, numbers of people that are preaching in mosques with homophobic, anti-Semitic, sexist and very, frankly, rather dangerous ideas of what a society should look like, people who endorse death because of blasphemy. There is a disproportionality there going on in your world, not represented by yourself. Do you acknowledge that being a problem?
I acknowledge the fact that we live in a very extreme world, from Donald Trump's rhetoric of banning Muslims from going into America when he was the president, to some of our own governments, Suella Braverman's recent statement, very inflammatory. I think we are living at a very extreme time, and extremism isn't limited to or commodity of one religion. It comes from religion and no religion. For example, France is well known for secular extremism. We want to condemn extremism in all its forms. Absolutely, we stand together in it. But the Conservative Party, especially Michael Gove, is treading a very dangerous path, because Michael Gove himself is known as a very extreme right-wing politician. Whose extremism are we talking about?
Hang on, who's ever described Michael Gove as an extreme right-wing politician?
I have. I've just done it.
Well, and you said he's well known as an extreme right-wing politician.
Well known within my circles of friends, as well as many people that I've spoken to. In fact, I don't know whether you know, he wrote a book called Celsius 7.
I did.
After 7/7 bombing in London, of course.
Yeah.
And a huge portion of it blames Muslims for some of the behavior of those lunatics and nutters who had carried out the bombing.
Well, I think he was blaming Muslims for the Muslims that carried out 7/7, 9/11, and those that supported it.
So I think Michael Gove's mantra, as far as I'm concerned, and I am entitled to my opinion, and that is, it is extreme right-wing, and I don't consider that
it's not extreme right-wing,
to a harmonious...
But he picked
harmonious existence in a cohesive society.
Do you know, it's interesting that that book, strangely, was the first time I'd heard the phrase political Islamism, where Mr. Gove was at pains to point out the distinction between that and Islam. But I mean, you're right, you can have your views of Michael Gove. I don't really care in that respect, but he was pointing out what I've just pointed out, the disproportionality that comes from people who carry out horrendous attacks and then claim and shout that this is in the name of, and then they will cite your God, your prophet. So there is a problem there, right? You acknowledge there is a problem, and it's a disproportionate problem. But he did also say, sorry to throw two things at you here, he did say in Parliament this is also about right-wing extremism.
So let's go back a little bit, Ian. Remember when Russia invaded Afghanistan? I was 18, 19-year-old kid. I'm pretty certain you were very conscious of what was going on. The Western world, Britain and America, and many of the left and right of the political spectrum encouraged people to go to Afghanistan and fight the Russians, because Russians were our enemy. Extremism began when we created bin Laden and his camps in Afghanistan. When we trained them, we armed them to the teeth, and we destroyed Russians because it served our interest. And the blowback from the bin Laden camp that we created is that we're living through the awful age of extreme fundamentalists. The recruits that we saw and we supervised and we trained are causing trouble in our own backyard. So to say Islam is responsible for our rotten foreign policy is not only disingenuous, but it's also untrue and unfair.
I don't think Islam is responsible for anything in that respect, but I think there are clearly people whose claim is to represent Islam who are responsible. Right now, if you went back in history, you'd find another religion or another group of people. But right now, in the current epoch, this is what we are dealing with. The terror attacks that have happened in this country have happened in the name of your faith. The issues we have with security services are happening in the name of your faith. Now, it might not, and I totally get it. I've yet to meet, well, I've met a couple through this job, but I've yet to meet a Muslim who shares those views either. So I wouldn't in any way, I'm too intelligent to try and suggest that it would be representative of Muslims. Of course it's not. But that is an issue that we are clearly looking at the moment. But there is a clash, isn't there, with things like, what is Islamophobia and what some people would see as blasphemy. Should I be able to insult your prophet right now? Am I allowed to do that in your world?
Ian, you're very clever in putting lots of questions in one, and then I can't answer one of them. So let me try and answer at least one. I know. Let me answer one at least. In Islam, you can criticize Islam, you can criticize God, you can criticize anybody you like. Freedom of expression is inherent in the Quran. God says you can accept God, you can reject him. It's not an issue. What we're saying is it is nothing to do with freedom of expression, this particular legislation. It's all to do with penalizing one community disproportionately. What you said earlier on, you're yet to meet many Muslims who are of that particular ilk. There are Christians who could be also equally extreme. There could be Jews who are equally extreme. There could be Muslims who are equally extreme. We reject extremism from all backgrounds.
I totally get that. And we know, the Ku Klux Klan would claim to be Christians, fair dues.
So let me finish my sentence. So to single out anybody is a problem. But bigger problem we have at the moment is that we're not willing to look at the root causes of the problem. The terrorists who carried out this July the 7th bombing or the 9/11 bombing, they blamed our unethical foreign policies in the Middle East. Unfortunately, those idiots who did what they did has caused this horrible thing, but it's bigger problem that we have become divided in between ourselves. You and I agree that we don't follow ethical foreign policy and consistent foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East. We're hypocritical. We've got double standards. We sell arms and weapons to weapons of nutters and crazy people who use it against their own people. And we keep on doing trade with those people. So if we are going to be consistent about democracy, rule of law, and freedom, let's be consistent across the board. Let's stop trading with Saudi Arabia. Let's stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Let's do the good things that we all stand for.
Look, Ajmal, notionally, I absolutely understand what you're saying. My point is only that at this current time, there is a disproportionate issue going on here. And I think that is of interest to people, and certainly to people listening to interviews and discussions and debates on this. There is this should rightly be raised. Why is that? I mean, you said that the Quran allows for freedom of speech. Unless you're a school teacher in Batley, then it clearly doesn't, because some teachers wanted this man killed. Some parents wanted this man killed and jailed. He now lives in hiding. If you're a kid who scuffs a Quran in a playground, somebody holds a Sharia court and death threats come his way. So there is a problem, right? That's not happening with Christianity.
Ian, you're being unfair here. On one hand, you say Islam doesn't, but you then say it does. It doesn't. You're talking to an Imam. You don't know Islam as much as I do. I think you can accept that. If I tell you in the Quran, it doesn't say you can't criticize the Prophet. If I tell you in the Quran, it says, in the Quran, it doesn't say you can't criticize God. In the Quran, it doesn't say you can't criticize Islam. In fact, you know what it says? Don't mock and insult other people's faith. That's what Islam says.
So just to clarify, sorry, can I or can I not mock your faith?
You can mock anything you like. You're free to mock anything.
Unless you're a school teacher in Batley. So how do you explain that? All of those parents, were they all extremists?
So Ian, I have the right to sneeze, but do I have the right to sneeze on your face?
Well, I don't even understand where that comes from.
It comes from a very important feature, and that is we all have freedom.
Okay.
I have freedom to speak anything I like.
Right.
I can't call a black person, listen, I can't call a black person with the N-word. I can't call a Jewish person and become anti-Semitic.
Of course.
There are certain responsibilities we all share. If,
all right.
for example,
but that is,
I go out of my way
that
to
they are
attack
immutable
and deride
characteristics of somebody rather than an invented religion as non-believers see it.
Yeah, so if non-believers want to criticize the religion, go ahead and criticize the religion intellectually.
All right,
but you
so
don't have...
my point, though, about specifically the Batley case, and I'm not just harking back to an old case, because I think it's still very relevant, but it is particularly acute in this context, that the parents that were calling for this man, some calling for him to die and others suggesting he should be in jail, certainly his career should be removed. Would you agree, then, that all of those parents are extremists and do not represent your faith?
I wouldn't say they're extremists, because then you're criminalizing a people for having a view. We can't criminalize people for having a view. If they've committed a crime...
What, a man should die because he showed some pictures, kids a picture of a cartoon?
We don't know the context. I actually said that teacher in Batley who faced that awful plight, I will go and defend his honor as an imam. I offered that myself on a live TV interview. I'm on record. You
should have gone up there, because the man needed help from people like you.
Yeah, but
he lives in hiding now.
I could speak all I like. Unless we are consistent with our approach, we're not going to change anything.
Okay.
Well, you and I agree, Ian, that the world is full of hate and extreme nowadays. Extreme and hatred that we see today isn't only coming from religion. It's also coming from secular individuals and secular groups.
Agreed.
And we need to eradicate from this world hatred as well as extremism. And how are we going to do that? By allowing a space where everyone feels safe to express themselves. You can criticize me all you like, but you don't have to ridicule me. I can criticize all I like about your views. I don't have to mock you. Mockery and ridicule isn't civilized, but criticism is.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that mockery is blasphemy. And even if it is blasphemy, you could argue, so what? Because that law doesn't exist in this country, but some people perhaps would like to see it.
Did you know that
10 seconds, Ajmal, if you can, sir.
I don't agree that there is a blasphemy law within Islam. I don't think so, because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, at his time was criticized, mocked, he was insulted. People did all sorts of things. He never put anyone to death because of that.
All right. Listen, I was reading a couple of days ago.
Islam completely.
I was reading a couple of days ago a 17-year-old and a 22-year-old about to be put to death in Pakistan for blasphemy. That could well be some local village court. I do not know, and I can't confirm it, but I'm aware those stories are out there. Listen, Ajmal, we could speak longer on this. I thank you for your time. Ajmal Masroor, of course, is an imam and broadcaster with us here on TalkTV.